Hello, lovely people. It's so lovely to see you here today. Thank you all so much for taking the time. I think we only announced this session on Thursday, so to have you here with us like this is absolutely incredible. So thank you all for taking the time today. I've got a lot to get through in today's introduction, but first of all, I've got to say thank you so much to everyone who's already popped in the chat feature where you're watching from. It just makes these sessions feel alive and makes us feel like we're having a conversation both ways. So thank you already. And if you haven't popped in where you're watching in from, like Robert, Jenny, Lydia, Chloe, Amy, James, and so many more of you, then it's so lovely to see you. Thank you for taking the time. I hope we make this hour brilliant for you. Before we get going with today's session, then I've got an ask right up the front, which is first keep that chat going, just like Richard, Sarah, Susanna, Zoe, Lisa are doing so wonderfully, because as I say, it makes the session feel fabulous. But then secondly, if you've got a takeaway from today's session, then please do drop it on social. I say that not for some horrible gamification reason. I say it very simply because that's how the community grows, and that's how we get to do sessions like this, and they feel buzzy and brilliant and wonderful every week. So please do drop your biggest takeaway on social afterwards. Today we have two fabulous speakers with you today. We have Lauren and we have Frank, both from Digital. Now, Lauren is a new friend, Frank is an old friend, and so I can speak about Lauren's capabilities as a very professional individual who sent over 1.5 billion emails in her time and millions of SMSs, resulting in 70 plus million of CRM attributable revenue, which is phenomenal. I think it's fair to say that we're in safe hands with Lauren. And then we've got Frank, who's the head of marketing for EMEA for Digital, who, as I say, is an old friend, so I'll speak about his character. And I'll say that Frank is one of the loveliest people that we've met throughout the duration of the marketing meetup. He's been so supportive of our community. He's the reason why this whole school exists. And so a big thank you to Frank because he's unbelievable and a brilliant person. Today forms a bit of a wrap up for our School of Email program that we've been running for the past 4 weeks, which has been 9 lessons over the past 4 weeks, where we've taken you from some of the not so basic basics through to some more advanced stuff on email marketing. Now, if you have missed it, if you haven't had all the lessons, then you can go to that QR code right there and you can sign up to get all of the lessons, because we'll be sending a summary email in the next couple of days of the whole course. And so you won't be able to miss out on anything. But if you haven't been part of the school, don't worry. Like, today's session is generic email marketing as well. And we really want your questions as well. So do pop them into the Q&A feature, which is found in the toolbar below. And we'll make sure that we get to those throughout the duration of today's session. Also, a big thank you to our sponsors this week. We've got Planable as our featured sponsor. Planable are the company who are our social media scheduling tool. We use them every day. They've just launched a brand new feature which enables you to comment from Planable on all of your respective social media channels, which makes it super easier to manage your social media. It's a game changer, well worth it. As Sarah said, they are brilliant. Also, a big thank you to Cambridge Marketing College, Known and Frontify. They're all fabulous brands who mean that we can keep on bringing these sessions to you. So adorning your screen right now, you've got the very brilliant Frank and the very brilliant Lauren throughout the duration of the rest of today's session. So thank you both so much for being here today. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Just a bit of a scene setting question, asking about what's changed in email marketing in the last year, specifically, so we can ground today's lessons in 2025, in your opinion.
Yeah, I think a lot changes in email marketing every day, month to month. I think over the last year, privacy, relevancy have all become heightened. We started seeing how AI starts to impact inboxes. So now on iPhone in particular, you'll see your pre-header text has been replaced by an AI summary of the email. So we just really need to make sure that we tighten up data. We're obsessing over relevance. So how do we make those emails stand out in the inbox? How do we make sure they're relevant to a consumer? And how do we respect the user's privacy? So putting them in control of the communications they receive has always been important, but now more than ever, it's so important to have preference centers, making sure that they can manage their subscription with you. If they want to unsubscribe, let them unsubscribe. Also being aware of things like Apple's email categorization, so that promo tab, the primary tab that has now come in, and just making sure that your emails are accessible. So not using full image-based emails that block kind of are blocking images. You can make them easy for people to read and engage with. And I think the big one for me, which has always been really important to me, is that email shouldn't be used in silo. We now more than ever see how channels and variations of channels need to work together for cross-channel marketing. At Digital, we have SMS and WhatsApp ads all working together. So we're moving away from email, we're moving into this kind of CRM, kind of relevancy personalization world
Era.
that is not just thinking about email, but thinking about how email and email data works with all of those channels and all of those messages.
I love that, and there's already probably 5 or 6 prompts for folks to sort of go away and sort of take a look. But I love that maybe as maybe the first sort of principal takeaway based on your answer there, to sort of even stop thinking of email as in its silo, to think of it as a channel which sits as part of wider cross-channel communication. And we'll come to that a little bit later as well, because I know that that's one of the questions that the community has already submitted ahead of today's session. I'm going to ask you one more question before we head to Frank for some examples of great email. But one of the questions that was submitted prior to today's session is just written in the most lovely way. So I'm going to read it out verbatim. It says, I have a sort of question, sort of sanity check. When it comes to email newsletters, how can we trust the metrics we get back? I read so much about open rates and click rates being skewed by mail providers. So a little bit like what you were just speaking about with the Apple stuff, spam filters, auto clicks, which makes it hard to have confidence when sharing the data with my sales team. Hey sales, we had 40% opens and 25% clicks, or did we? Oh look, and so on and so forth. So like, how are you thinking about the trust that you have in your metrics, and how do you start reporting? Because like, I've always gone by opens and clicks because that's the first thing you will see in these platforms. But how do you do it?
Yeah, I think this plays into the email CRM question around moving away from just email and not thinking, yes, open rate and click rate are important. They are important metrics, but they shouldn't just be the metrics you're looking at. They should be paired with things like conversion rate, how many on-site views you've had, if you're seeing form submissions come from that newsletter. So pairing them with customer metrics, purchase rates and things like that. So you're starting to build a customer picture from that email rather than just Bob opened my email 6 months ago and that's it. So really building a customer view and segmenting your customers around, okay, these are my active customers. We know that they've done XYZ in the last 6 months, and that's why we're classing them as active. But also pairing your CXDP data with something like a Google Analytics. So you're seeing that email data and how those people are then going on to browse around the website. So we sent this email and we saw a spike in Google Analytics. We've also seen that in our Digital platform as well. So you're kind of pairing data sources so that you can then bring them together.
Love that. And we've got Sophie just asking in the chat what a CSDP is. Would you be able to
Oh,
Just clarify
a
that.
CXDP
A
is a
CX.
customer experience data platform. So Dot Digital is a CXDP. It's where you're um, pushing customer experience, providing it with data as well. So we're bringing data in from lots of different sources, using things like form submissions and things, and then making that an easy to use data. We're aggregating data and then letting you push it out onto different channels.
Love that. And I think that so succinctly answers the question around trust, because I think when you were speaking there, Lauren, like so much of it, it was just struck me that we can immediately go into today's conversation and sort of speak about really exciting things around newsletters and emails and all sorts of things. But like any marketing channel, you don't do these things without an element of a strategy behind it. So
Mhm.
the spirit of what you were speaking about in your answer there, I mean, which you put way more succinctly than I can, is having a purpose, these things. You know, why are we doing the newsletter? Um, or why are we sending emails? Or why are we sending SMSs? Because then that will
Mhm.
illuminate a metric. And if you're then double checking these things against like various platforms, you've then got trust in the data, but you've also got purpose for the data, which
Yeah.
feels really important.
Yeah, and I think it's not thinking about, yes, you need to make sure that the email you sent is performing well, but ideally you should be looking at things at a higher level, a kind of more in-depth level of this is my strategy, this email is part of my strategy, how is my strategy performing? So if you're sending a monthly newsletter, how did all of those emails perform that month? Are you seeing the overall goal of kind of 10 form submissions? Has that happened? And if not, what is your pivot for the next month? So yes, look at individual performance, but look at your overall performance as well, because that will likely paint a better and more succinct profile of what is actually going on.
Love that. I love that. Thank you so much for speaking to that. Because like, even as someone who sent millions and millions of emails, I will still default to opens and clicks. Sort of say, "Oh, we did well today," you know, rather than we sort of
Yeah,
did well in the totality, you know.
I
And so,
think that's what we're taught to do. We're
mhm.
taught to look at, oh, that email performed well, this email didn't. Whereas, yeah, let's broaden our horizons a bit and look at, I think that's where that switch comes in from email to CRM, where you start looking at people and customers. And I think that's where you start talking about a CXDP or moving away from this email service kind of relationship where you're talking about open rate and things. Whereas from a CXDP perspective, you're looking at customer movement and people movement through what you're trying to achieve.
Love that. As a mindset shift, that's immediately super useful. And we may jump a little bit more deeper into that later in today's session as well, because I'd love to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts.
Mm.
Um, but folks, just before we head to Frank, just the point of encouragement here. If you have any questions throughout the course of today's session, do drop them into the Q&A, as I can see Tom did right now, just so we can make sure that we make this session everything you want it to be, and not just us chatting at you, because you're really important. So let's head to Frank. And Frank, what email programs do you see that are doing great in terms of effectiveness, like speaking to examples? And what characterizes sort of great email programs, if we're going to use a sort of a generic high level term?
Yeah, and I think that question is so just trying to think about it. It'd be very easy for me to just give everybody the answers, and I wish I knew them myself. I'm in the marketing team at Dot Digital. I'm responsible, along with many others, about communicating the Dot Digital brand and make sure that we can, keep the customers that we have informed about product updates, events, anything that's really happening within the Dot Digital sphere, but also attracting new customers, potential customers as well. So I have lots of challenges that we try to get over. But I think the thing that I've learned of being a true marketer and being an email marketer from the first part of my career is that automation is your best friend. So when we're looking for what email programs look like, I'm not telling grandma to suck eggs or whatever the phrase is, teaching. It is going to be around what's going to help you save time, but also do some of the real time, and this is what Lauren was saying about sort of this CXDP platform. Is everybody's data is growing. We're getting more and more data, and really, if we're going to be capitalizing on that, we need an engine, let's say, for want of a better phrase, that can just make some of those decisions and shift some stuff out of the door for us really quickly. So I think anything where you've got programs that are doing some form of in automation on some form of logic, you're already winning. I'd say if you're not doing that, again, I'm sure we've got loads of different sizes businesses on the webinar, and probably different maturities when it comes to being a marketer. Like, if you've not got a welcome program, or as soon as somebody converts on your site, if they're not getting something automated from you, go and introduce it today, because it really is going to be the first thing that's going to see you're going to see spikes in, we've just talked about stats, and the funny thing there is, even before some of this Apple stuff, if you wanted to, we've all been there, and I know my first job when I was working in email marketing, if somebody asked me what my best performing email campaign, I know that it's an automated conversion on the site, because somebody's just giving you your information. Of course they're going to open the email, so you can be sort of clever about that, but in the back of your mind thinking, okay, somebody's just giving you that information, whether that's a straight up email address, whether it's an order confirmation, whether it's an update of preferences, that person deserves to have a response from you. And that doesn't need to be, transactional in a sense of just super boring. Can introduce them more to your brand. You can start talking about, what the next steps are, thinking about introducing cross-sell messages. And I think there's a lot that's, with Digital, new customers have a suite of programs already built, whether that's onboarding, anniversary. That doesn't have to be birthday. That could be the anniversary of a first touch point. You have things like abandoned carts. If you're not selling things, somebody's coming to the site, let's say you're a university, or you do courses, or somebody's looking at courses but they don't complete conversion, get to send them something, because ultimately we want to keep that person engaged. So if I'm going to generalize what email programs, good ones, look like, they are going to be automated ones. And I guess off the top of my head, one that I do reference quite a lot is a customer of ours called Nutri Advance. So they sell supplements and vitamins. So for all intents and purposes, this is quite an easy use case to probably understand. And I appreciate it's not going to transcend all of the businesses on the call, but I think the learnings are I'll come to them at the end. So they sell vitamins and supplements. So if I buy my packet of 28 vitamin C tablets, in theory, if I'm taking them once a day, by day 25, I'm probably going to really want to order some more. So what they do is, instead of me looking up and going, oh, Frank's on 21 days, Joe's on 22 days, Lauren's on 23, the system does that for them. That's going to send them that email, and they're going to do that repeat purchase. I mean, the revenue that's driving is going into the hundreds of %, because it's just happening behind the scenes. But the learning from that is that if you've got a product life cycle that goes through, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, just start to play around a little bit around understanding when that customer life cycle is, and you can put some of those automations in place. I think that's a really good example of just doing some of the heavy lifting behind the scenes, so you can start being creative, right? And that's what marketing's all about, thinking about these new campaigns to ultimately drive us more sort of revenue or awareness, or whatever the goal of your business is.
Love that, mate. And like, it's an interesting answer, because it wasn't the answer I was expecting you to give. But to summarize, you to sort of say, the best email is one that you probably won't click send on, but is one that you are automating in the background, is really really interesting. And I want to. There's a question that's come in from the community before this today's session on this exact subject, so I'm gonna come back to you on this, but I also wanted to pick up on the automation thing, and sort of say that this is an opportunity for creativity and experimentation. So like, there was a company a long time ago called CD Baby that some folks may be familiar with, and they've been bought out now, but sort of 20 years ago, they wrote their email confirmation as such, and it goes, "Thank you for your order with CD Baby. Your CD has been gently taken from our CD Baby shelves with sterilized contamination-free gloves, and placed onto a satin pillow. A team of 50 employees inspected your CD and polished it to make sure it was in the best possible condition before mailing. Our packing specialist from Japan lit a candle and hush fell over the ground as he put your CD into the finest gold-lined box that money can buy. We all had a wonderful celebration afterwards, and the whole party marched down the street to the post office, where the entire town of Portland waved bon voyage to your package on its way to you in our private CD Baby jet on this day, Friday, June the 6th. I hope you had a wonderful time shopping at CD Baby. We sure did. Your picture is on our wall as Customer of the Year. We're all excited, we're all exhausted, but can't wait for you to come back to cdbaby.com. Thank you once again, Derek Sivers. And like, just as an example of a confirmation email that is automated, that is fabulous and different and creative, like, I just wanted to pick up on that because like, that's like a game changer for doing something special.
It really is. And can I just say that that's an amazing example. And actually, if you that's not what I don't need you to reread it, but what that had some really nice personalization points in there. There's a couple of points. I think you had Portland, you had the dates. I can't quite remember if you said the name of the CD. The beauty of it is you can templatize that whole thing, and all you need to really do is pull in those 3 data points. Let's say there's the name of the product, the date of the shipment, and where it's coming from, and you've already got a really highly personalized automated email from data that you're already getting from a first party perspective. So just taking the time to set some of this stuff up from a template perspective, you can have the impact that has. And we all agreed that is it was it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's memorable.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes it's you don't necessarily realize, and this happens to me as well. You don't always realize that some of those things, putting in that front work, you can surface some personalized data that you already captured to make an impact.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, that went viral. It was 20 years ago, but like the business was built off the back of it as well, so it's that kind of thing. I'm noticing in the chat there's a lot of folks asking about B2B, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that because I'll ask that question after this next one, but I want to follow the thread of automation just for one moment because we had a question submitted before. So thank you to everyone saying about B2B, and we'll get to that. So the question that came before about automation is someone who said, I've been doing emails for a while, but I've always struggled with building flows that are longer than 3 or 4 emails in the sequence. And so, Lauren, I guess I'll put this to you, and I'll make it a generic question to start off with. But how do you start to think about building these flows and these automations in a way that actually really works? Because like so far, we've had this session around sort of like testing and just sort of figuring things out. But like practically, how did you do it?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to think when you start building automation is you can get really overwhelmed with the kind of builder and where to put blocks in the journey, but actually step back and put yourself in the customer's shoes. What are they going through? If you were signing up for that business, where would you sign up from? If you think about a welcome flow, often there's a lot of different entry points. So not just a one-dimensional automation. Think about all the different ways someone could come into business and where they would then want to hear from you and what way they would want to hear from you. So when you think about, I've got 3, 4 emails, start to build that out, start to think about the length of that, the channels that you put into that. So yes, you might have 3 or 4 emails, but maybe start to add in an SMS message or use kind of Facebook targeting to really expand that automation. Sometimes 3 to 4 emails is plenty. Sometimes you need to expand it. So you might just want to expand it for people who haven't gone on to make a purchase, or you might just want to expand it to people who have engaged with those emails. So start building up that loyalty. So really use segmentation within an automation to build. And then the most important thing for automations is not to set and forget them. So you might start with 3 emails, but then test if 4 emails works, 5 emails, but also test the time in between those emails. So yes, 3 or 4 emails might be great. It might be optimum for your audience, but maybe the time needs tweaking, or maybe the audience that you're sending to needs tweaking. So always look at running that test, running it for a month. I really don't like it when you just set a test live, you've run it for 24 hours and you've decided that that's right. Run it for a long period of time, and really test your hypothesis. So pull it a bit and keep optimizing your automation, because I think, yeah, 3 to 4 emails is great, but is the content right? And are you putting yourself in the customer's shoes, and are you going through what they would? And I think sometimes the best way to do that is to step away from your computer and get out the sticky notes and the bit of paper and start to go back to basics around, okay, my customer's doing this. It would make sense to me to receive X, Y, Z, and maybe I would see this on Facebook, or I would receive this via WhatsApp. So really put yourself in the customer's shoes to look at that kind of automation.
Nice. I love that. And, it's funny as you speak, because, I started to think about how folks could enter the marketing meetup, and my intuitive sort of answer was towards the newsletter page. But then, of course, there was the webinars, and then there's the events, and all of a sudden, there's the banner at the top of our website and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, go, oh, wow, there's could be 4 different flows there, or 4 variations
Yeah.
that really go a long way. There's a question here from David in the chat, which I wouldn't usually take the questions from the chat, but he picked up on a specific point, which is, do the tests have to be statistically significant? I would say, based on your answer, and hopefully not putting words in your mouth too much, but please contradict, that you use the word hypothesis in your answer. And so
Yeah.
maybe it's less about statistics significance and more about proving or disproving your hypothesis.
Yeah, so I think tests should be statistically relevant. I really, my bugbear as an email marketer and CRM practitioner is that we test things for an hour and then make a decision that that's great and roll them out. I don't think that's the case. I don't think we should just test with 10% of the audience, because what happens if the other 80 or 90% have a completely different way of doing things? So my way of testing would be to split your audience 50-50. So if you're doing it via an automation, split them 50-50. You then have a test group and a control group, and then you can monitor how the test group performed against the control group. And like I said a minute ago, run that for a lengthy period of time. I would usually say, if it's kind of a business as usual newsletter, make sure you've run it for at least 4 emails. If you're running it for an automation, make sure you're running it for kind of a month. You've got that, you haven't just had 100 people run through it, you've had a significant amount of people run through it. So you can then make that choice and feel comfortable that enough data has run through it that test shows that your hypothesis is correct.
Love that. Thank you so much. And I love, by the way, this is a real plus with your answers, and just wanted to pick up on this. The specificity that you're sharing with the community is really appreciated, because sometimes when you're coming into these things, and particularly for those in smaller marketing teams, if you don't have someone telling you some quote unquote rules, even though I appreciate you're not setting these out as rules, but experience shared, then it gives folks something to work with. So thank you for doing that as well. Frank, you were nodding really effusively when I mentioned the B2B stuff. So I just wanted to come to you first on that. And really, the questions that the community seemed to be picking up on was this stuff really seems to work for B2C, but does it work in a B2B context as well? And I think this was around the point where we were speaking about automations, but I would also widen it out if you'd like to. So do you see much difference between the B2C and B2B stuff?
On paper, no, right? If we do under the surface, the the technology, the theory, what we're trying to do, it is relatively the same. It's not probably 100%, but it's relatively the same. We're still trying to get a person at the other end of the computer or the email to buy from us or interact with us. I appreciate that not everybody's chasing revenue, but in theory, you've got to trying to make something out of what you're doing. So on paper, I think that they are very similar. I'll come into some more examples in a second. The biggest difference is, and I will admit this as a B2B marketer, is we're really not very good at like talking about when we do things really well, because I think when the B2C settings, the goals are slightly easier because it usually is just around sales and it's all very much sort of revenue focused. Whereas with the B2B, so let's take my role for example. I don't necessarily directly attribute my work to more people spending with Dr. Digital. Although, obviously we want to make sure our customers are, getting the most out of the platform. But my goals are around event signups or people filling out surveys or, giving us feedback or UGC and all of that sort of stuff. And that actually is similar. We're looking for somebody to convert and do the thing that we want. So if we can try and take, a step back, we can still apply some of those things like welcome email. If somebody's giving you your information, regardless of what sector you work in, you can set them a sort of an automated program. It may be different there because you may not be signposting them to buy the next product or book the next trip, but you're still wanting to use that as a way of educating that person about your business. Why have they given you that information? Like what future content do you have? Do you run any webinars? There are other opportunities to get people to convert. Things about like follow-ups after events specifically. So if you do run webinars or any in-person events, you can automate those follow-ups and they can be personalized. Re-engagement emails, right? So if you're sitting on loads of a pool of data, whether that's, I know some people are mentioning they don't have a CRM or wherever your data's at, it could be in a system like an ESP, like a Dot Digital Lite or a CXDP, depending on how big your business is. Being able to re-engage that pool of people that haven't interacted with you in a 12-month period and put them in a 3-step program, that's an automation and that can still drive results. So yes, it might not be traditionally, you bought this, now buy this, or, you left this in your basket, we want to do this. There are other ways of just putting some standard automations to make sure that we can still get people to interact with the brand. But we've got a long way to go in terms of really setting the gold standard and sharing what works. And I think the final thing I'll say is I think just B2B businesses are more complicated. They do have more so those different goals, different objectives, and it's not always, like I said, that sale at the end. But if we can start to break down our KPIs based on conversion, engagement, sentiment, NPS scores, you can start to similarize a little bit about what's happening in the B2C world.
Love that. And I think that's such an interesting point and such a useful one, because I think the language that we so often use to describe a successful email is something like sales, because it is, e-com as an example is such an interesting industry as well, and so a lot of people gravitate to it. But by breaking it down to those different metrics, Frank, I think that's really useful as a mindset shift. So thank you for speaking to that. And folks, if you'd like to dive into that topic anymore, sorry, I sounded so corporate there saying dive in there. Feel free to pop a question into the Q&A because I'm keeping an eye on it. And we can head into the first question now, because I can see that there's nearly 10 open questions. Thanks, Eleanor. Hashtag deep dive. We can head into that Q&A right now. So the first question is from Lindsay, and this is going to be an experience question, I think, Lauren, rather than expecting you to have some stats on hand immediately. But Lindsay asks, with email design or copy, are there any techniques that used to work but don't any longer? So Lindsay's thinking about things like the use of emojis in subject lines, pre-headers to increase opens. Lindsay's basically asking, with the final question here, what's working right now for email generically?
I'm going to answer that with a really horrible answer, but I would say it really depends on your brand and what works for your audience. So I would come back to testing and testing again and underpinning that. I think one point for me is, I think as a kind of industry, we went through a phase of everyone jumping on image-based emails and things like that. And I think that has really pulled back. last month, actually, the European Accessibility Act came out, and that really pulled everyone back from image-based emails in terms of making sure that emails can be accessible. They're tightened up in terms of design and copy and things. So I think that is one change we are seeing quite recently and rapidly. But in terms of emojis, subject line, pre-header text, I would say it really depends on your audience. If I think about an e-commerce brand that's got quite a young demographic, yes, emojis might really work for them. But if I think about a kind of corporate B2B area, maybe not so. So I would say test these things. Do emojis work? Does the placement of emojis work? The length of your subject line, how your email is laid out, things like that. So just really having a really thorough testing plan. And again, pushing your hypothesis. If you think emojis don't work, test them and come to that conclusion and test again. Yeah, the one thing I would say that has always been a kind of current in email marketing is just making sure that the audience can easily understand what your email is about. I always say use the 10-second rule. If I can open an email, understand it, digest it within 10 seconds and know what you're asking of me, I'm not puzzled around 20 CTAs all trying to get me to do a different thing. I'm really clear on what that email wants me to do and the next step. And I think, sorry, that is another important thing to note, is that email is only a step in the journey. You want someone to take that next step, whether that's a sign up to a webinar like Frank mentioned, going on to buy something, completing a contact form to work with you. It is a step in that journey. So you want to make that step as easy as possible for that person. And therefore doing the 10-second rule, you can make sure that they easily understand it. And let's be honest, the email inbox is very saturated all the time. So making sure that your email does stand out and is easy for the user to understand is really important.
Yeah, love it, and love the 10-second rule, and like what was fabulous, and it's a nuance of your answer there, but easy for the user to understand is so fabulous, because it kind of wraps up so much in terms of understanding that it's your user, you know, it's your folks. And so thank you. I mean, sometimes it can feel like the cop out answer, even if it's the right answer, but I don't think it is. So thank you. I'll come to you with this one as well, Lauren, because it hits a little bit more technical side-ish. And it comes from Eleanor, who says that one of the issues with email is getting something that looks good in Outlook, as it often breaks things. So for Eleanor's audience, a lot of them use Outlook, so it makes it hard to be creative. How do you deal with the limitations of the various different platforms when it comes to sort of designing and trying to create something beautiful?
Yeah, we all hate Outlook, don't we? It's definitely a struggle. I would say use expertise around you. I think email design and HTML is very difficult to make sure that you have everything working and things are previewing correctly. There are people that are very experienced in these things. In terms of at Dot Digital, we have a creative team who are trained on design and HTML and things like that. So that is one avenue, but also use a tool like Litmus or email on Acid to make sure that your email is previewing correctly. The worst thing to do would be to press send without seeing what that looks like for a consumer. So yes, even if you do need to do a stripped back version for Outlook customers and maybe segmenting them out to a separate send, you can then really utilize and see what that email is going to show them. So although it might not be as pretty, it is functioning and the user can interact with it.
Love that. And so just to reiterate, because we've often found that folks really appreciate tools being called out. So Litmus is the one you mentioned there.
Yeah,
Also,
and email on Acid.
Amazing. Thank you. And
Mm.
just to add to that, one of the things, so we work in a relatively small team for our emails. So even just running your email through ChatGPT before to catch for stuff is a different question to the Outlook stuff. But for
Mm.
proofreading and stuff like that is also been a bit of a recent game changer for us, even though it's a relatively basic thing to do.
Yeah,
So
I think from an email marketing perspective, that is a really kind of bit of the email process that is really left behind sometimes. We spend all this time finessing and making our email look beautiful that we often forget that there's going to be someone at the end of it who needs to see that email and what it looks like. So that testing perspective, making sure you have a really thorough testing checklist. You preview the email before it goes, you look at it on your mobile, you really understand it and get someone else to look at it to make sure you've not spent all this time finessing this lovely email that when it actually lands with someone, it's not going to land. So that testing phase is just as important as the build and the kind of strategy behind an email.
bang on. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Right, I'm going to do something I don't think we've done for quite some time, which is I'm going to address a question directly to the community in the chat feature, while I then ask Frank a question around deliverability. So the question that I'd like to ask the community is the one that's gravitated to the top of the Q&A, which comes from Jake. So Jake says, working as a solo marketer in a B2B company, what is the point where emails get spammy? I'm doing 3 emails a week, mostly to get to our full list of customers. I feel like I'm doing too much, question mark. So the nature of that question felt like some community support. So I'd be really interested in the chat responses to Jake's question around how much is too much when it comes to emails. In the meantime, Frank, I'm going to come to you on a question around deliverability, because we've had quite a lot around folks saying that they want to avoid the spam feature, they want to avoid getting in the dreaded promotions tab, etc., etc. In the Digital school that we just did, we spoke about the 6 C's of deliverability, which were consent, content, cadence, contacts, consistency, and change. All of which, if you haven't seen them already, I'll put the link at the end so folks can sign up for the school. Is avoiding spam, is avoiding the promotions folder like the goal here when we're speaking about deliverability? I mean, spam obviously feels like a yes, but when it comes to promotions folder, is that the goal, or are we targeting the wrong thing if we're trying to avoid promotions? Because that's what we're basically doing a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'll caveat my answer to say I'm definitely not a deliverability expert. However, one thing that we're really proud, and this is not a plug for Digital, but it sort of is, because it's one thing we're really, really proud of, and I would say it's one of our USPs, is that I think on average customers see a 98% deliverability rate across email, which is great. We've got a real great expert team that's spread across the globe that can help really specific cases. So just to say that first. But then to the point, let's take my personal opinion then. I think there's 2 things. One, we're probably going to end up in a spam filter at some point. Probably there's one of those 3 or 6 C's that we're going to get probably wrong. We might have rushed something out. We may use, even, we've got all of this logic that these engines are learning from, AI added in there as well. They can sometimes just totally misinterpret what you're saying. So something we at Digital, we have our own mini proofing channel. So like you're talking about the chat GPT, which I think is good. But what we do is we put something in marketing proof Slack channel, and then everyone will go through and just do that due diligence, which is really good.
Nice.
A little bit, especially when you haven't been in it in a while and everyone's like, you spelled this wrong. It can be a little, but rather it's caught internally than going externally. But even things like some of the words that can get trapped in some of these filters nowadays, which on paper might not feel like anything rude or not swearing or anything like that. It's just sort of like a sense of urgency, overusing exclamation points and stuff, like something that actually feels quite natural to us as marketers when we're like trying to emphasize points, can actually get flagged by these things probably more likely to be wrongly flagged, but it's going to happen. So I think, well, first thing is that let's not live and die by being where we need to be. What we need to work on is how we can learn from that. To quote Lauren, testing is all about understanding that. Where are we seeing those deliverability reports? Are there certain email templates or a certain style of email? Because you may have different templates depending on different sort of actions in your business. Are there any of those that are more likely to get fewer items delivered than others? And ultimately, yeah, I think it's just around trying to understand that we're creating emails can be so difficult because we spend so much time in making them. Maybe slightly less now. We've got a few tools to help us along the way, but I've put emails together when I've put that. It looks amazing inside, and then you don't quite get the subject line right, and then nobody even bothers with it. So I think from a deliverability perspective, I think it's about understanding using that 10-second rule. I think that's great. Like, actually, if somebody gets this, is it going to do what we need? Because ultimately, if we're going to go through all of the hoops of all of the extra verifications that we need, Dymark, all of that sort of stuff, I mean, BIMI stuff, where it's about validating your brand against that little picture in some of the service providers. If we're going to go through all of that, which is a necessary part of a certain level of business, to then have your email land flat or not worry about what we need to do is just so soul destroying, isn't it? So I think let's think about, again, not to quote Lauren again, but just say lean on expertise. Let's look at where we can use our own service providers, because if you're sending emails through a platform, whether that's .digital, I've seen some others named, I'm going to name them, but MailChimp, Klaviyo, HubSpot, we're all in a similar boat. .digital's slightly better, I kid, but we all have a responsibility. If we're helping you send your emails, we have a responsibility to make sure those emails get through. So if you are having issues, if you're seeing issues, if you're worried about that, please do go to the providers, because that's part of the service, right? We are as a business, we are servicing marketers, and we want to make your lives easier. So I'd say need on the help. Don't live and die by, sometimes we will get in those traps. But just try to, but when you're putting your emails together, make sure that when they do land, they do exactly what they say that you need them to do. And that's the mantra I try to live by.
No, I think that's spot on. It's really, I think it's reassuring, because like I've certainly worried about it in the past. If I've seen like a dip in the open rate, for example, and I know that we've covered that already in today's session, then I'll go, oh wait, are we suddenly in the promotions folder? And like you go, oh, what do we do to get out of it? But actually, to your point, Frank, maybe it's a thing. Maybe you're in the promotions folder now, but if your email, as Lauren is saying, is doing what it needs to do in the first 10 seconds, then it's going to reach the right people, which is a good thing. So, maybe not hiding behind that is okay. But also, Frank, one of the reasons I like you was a lot of the humanity behind your answer there at the end as well, about being there to help, which is really appreciated. As we come towards the last 10 minutes, I'm just going through the questions in the Q&A, trying to band them together into themes. But while I do that, I want to come to one of the hardest things to do in email marketing, which is cleaning your list and sort of saying goodbye to folks who might have signed up. And there was a stat in the school which said that the average email list naturally decays at 22.5% every year, which I didn't know before school, but is actually like quite reassuring as well. Because like, if you see that drop, you go, oh, it's not just me. And so actually the recommendation in the school was that you do like focus on 70% on list growth and 30% on conversion optimization. I just wanted to ask, if there's any great advice for growing lists in 2025, because I think a lot of people would have done gated content back in the day and stuff like that. Is that still relevant? What are the on-trend things that people are doing to grow their email lists right now? Lauren, I'll probably come to you first. Again, I appreciate this is going to be an opinion rather than sort of like data-led necessarily, because we're throwing this straight at you. But what are the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's being smart about email sign up placement. I think historically there has been a lot of, we'll put a gated content, particularly for people like B2B, when people move through the checkout and things like that. Some of the most recent ones I've seen is when you're someone's reading a blog article, if they're like 50% scroll, 75% scroll, trigger a sign up form then. Because you've got their interest, you can see what content they're already engaging with. So they're halfway through that article, get them, as they're showing that intent, to input their email address in there. But also look at things like timely pop-ups. Don't just show a pop-up as soon as someone lands on your site. You haven't given them the time to engage with the website. So look at kind of exit intent. If they've not been active for 2 or 3 minutes, show them a pop-up to either save their basket or kind of when things are back in stock. So be really smart around the behavior that a user is showing, and trigger kind of captures around that point, because then you'll play into that behavioral point. You're not just doing a one size fits all. Oh, this pop-up works when we show it at 10 seconds of them landing on a page, because you're just going to infuriate the user, and you're not then treating them as a individual and that kind of relevancy approach.
How about you, Frank? I haven't done a lot of asking you both questions in this session. I mean, have you seen any trends worth paying attention to when it comes to building lists?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Lauren says. I think there's a definitely, when we're looking for data, regardless of what sector you're in, like we all aware of companies wanting our data. I think that's a given now in 2025, and it's not going anywhere. But I think what we do need to lean on to is that sort of transparency about what we're going to do once we have it. So making sure that when we've got those signups at strategic parts of the customer life cycle, we're giving clear and honest communications about how we're using that. And obviously some of that stuff has to be from a legal perspective, but some of it can be like, okay, thanks for giving us your email, Frank. We're going to email twice a week until you die about this, and this. If you don't want this, go to your preference. I laugh, but sometimes we just don't even communicate what we're going to do with that data. And you can just say that this is what you can expect from us with and all this sort of stuff, and really just have that transparency, because list growth for me is also about protecting the churning of dead data. Your list is not shrinking if you are continuing to set the expectations of the data that you have. So how, and if somebody hasn't engaged with you in a year, just say, hey, are your preferences up to date? That person can be like, oh, actually, no, I do like that brand, but some of it's just not relevant. And I think we can be a little tentative to do that. But I think that's a tactic that I'm seeing a lot more. Once we've got the data, we need to treat it as precious, treat it as a case of this is how we're going to set those expectations. And if somebody doesn't want to hear from us from email, let's ask them about SMS or WhatsApp or social. Like there's still an easy sort of that breakup of that communication doesn't have to be the be all and end all. It can be a renegotiation of your relationship with that person, and can potentially become more fruitful. So I think you can focus on the data you have and keeping those lists intact, rather than sort of looking at a gradual churn of sort of dead and unengaged data.
Nice.
I
think
think
that's
what
really.
oh sorry, Joe. I think what Frank just said plays into the question that's been going back and forth in the chat feature as well, around is 3 emails a week too many? And I think that question plays perfectly into put your customers in control of what they want to receive and how much they want to receive, but also categorize your customers. So like Frank said, if they haven't interacted or made a purchase within a year, put them into a separate pot and send them less emails, but more rounded emails. Whereas your active customers, your kind of new customers, can tolerate a more kind of higher volume of emails because they are that strong intent. So don't just think about your customer base as a blanket. Think about it as different groups of customers and how you put them in control of the communications they receive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And like to both of your points, I mean, it's really interesting because only this morning at TMM, we were speaking about how we can update our subscription center. And the point about you made there, Frank, about the clarity of what you're going to do with someone's data. So there's a really elegant example on marketingexamples.com where Harry, the guy who runs it, says, get 6 new tips in your inbox every Monday. And that's literally the call to action in the sign up box. And every Monday you're going to get an email with 6 tips, and then it's like, there you go, cool. And but I think to the point around the unsubscription center, what that forces you to do also, to Lauren's point there, when you're saying about SMS and bringing in all these different channels, is it makes you become more clear on your own marketing as well. You know, I'm going to do 3 emails per week, and the first email is going to be about a webinar, the second email is going to be about a wrap up, and the third email is going to be a newsletter style thing, and then we may follow it up with a text. All of a sudden you've got a lot more clarity to your newsletter activity as much as anything else. So the give and take of giving your customers clarity is a win-win for everyone, which is, you know, I just think it's really important, but also something that when you're in a small team especially is quite hard and sometimes easy to miss, because you're like, we'll just send another newsletter, which, you know, so many of us often do.
So just one more thing, just as you were talking, so this came to me the other day, and I'll make this quick, is I think if people are worried about sending too many emails, I would go to try and remember the last time you as a consumer unsubscribed from a brand, and ask yourself, why did you do that? Was it because of the volume? I would hazard a guess, it's probably not necessarily about the volume. It's just the fact that that is no longer relevant for you. So I just try to say, as a some homework for everybody, just go and think of the last time, or look at your inbox and think, you know, could I unsubscribe from this brand? And obviously that can be a B2C or whoever, and then just ask that question why. And I think you'll be more interested of the response. It may not always be about volume. It can be about those other things. And that's what we're talking about, trying to be more relevant and personalized based on not treating your audience all the same.
That's it. And honestly, you know, a big thank you to everyone in the chat feature for sharing your experiences and thoughts there as well, because what was interesting for me was the diversity of opinions as well. And so, to your point, Frank, you know, there can be a multitude of factors for why someone might unsubscribe, get overwhelmed, etc. And so, knowing what that might be and looking at it through different lenses is so, so important. Let's head into the final question, because we've got 2 minutes and Miranda has offered a very elegant way to end today's session, with a question for you both, which is, what's one big common mistake businesses make with email marketing, and how can we avoid it? And so Lauren, earlier on in today's conversation, you said something along the lines of one of my biggest bugbears. I wonder whether you've got a bigger bugbear sat somewhere in your email locker.
Oh yeah, I think I have plenty. I think my biggest bugbear is businesses thinking that first name personalization is enough, and that it can be used and they can class that as, I've personalized that email. I don't think that is personalization. I think it's the first step, but I think personalization is so much stronger now. And you used that email example earlier, but it it should be personalized to the fact that I don't notice that you've put my first name in the subject line. It should, Trainline did one a few weeks ago actually, where it was about how much I'd saved and where I'd saved that money. And it was subtle personalization, but it was so relevant to me, and it made me engage with the email, and I was interested in the stats that were there because they were my stats. So I think whenever we think about whether it's loyalty in email or my order, or kind of the next step in my journey, or if it's just a monthly newsletter, how are we dropping those subtle personalization points into an email without, one, overdoing it, or two, just using first name, last name, you just bought X, and it doesn't need to be detailed out. It can be as subtle as product recommendations, or your loyalty points, or things like that. So looking at a more well-rounded approach to personalization rather than just the obvious.
Nice. Love that so much. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Frank, we'll give the last word to you, my friend.
I think mine is just, overlooking the value of segmentation. And when, the chips are down and the stats are down, it's send to all. And that is my biggest bugbear, because it's just not the way of what we need to be of email marketing in 2025. We need to be smarter with the way that we're looking at our customers as groups, and be more personalized. And more doesn't necessarily mean more. And we can't just say send to all to get the sales figure up or the engagement up. It's about understanding how we can be personalized to those groups of people and give them the information and the relevancy that they want and they're starting to expect.
Love it.
That is a great one. I think the most common use phrase is, can we just send another email?
Can we just send it to the whole list instead?
I love it. Well, I'm guilty of it too. So,
we probably all are, but I think we just need to be aware of, there's supporting each other by trying not to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you both for a cracking hour where I feel like there's so much value and like across a real breadth of subjects as well. So thank you both for so generously sharing throughout the duration today. It's really, really appreciated. We can see the comments coming into the chat. We've got Steve saying it was so informative. We've got some really useful. I saw someone earlier saying this was the best best webinar they've attended, and so endlessly useful. So thank you both very, very much. In the follow-up email today, we are going to. It won't arrive today. It'll arrive on Thursday. We'll drop the link to get the summary email, which will include today's webinar and all the lessons from the School of Email. So if you haven't already signed up for the School of Email, we'll pop it in there. I'm also going to pop it into the chat feature, but I suspect it may get buried by people saying great session. So there's that. We'll be back next Tuesday. So honestly, it'd be great to see you there. But honestly, Frank, Lauren, such a pleasure for spending the time. And thank you to everyone in the community. You make these sessions so special every week. So it's endlessly appreciated. With all that said, hope to see you next week, and have a brilliant day, everyone. Take care.